Since the attendee numbers are not going up anymore, I think we have all who wanted to join this session. In case you miss it, the recording will be available on my blog. First of all, I would like to thank you all for attending and giving your time to listen to me. I'm running this on Teams live events, so if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat section, and I'll come back to them after my presentation. So without much delay, I'll get started. So the talk today is going to be focused on environment variables in Power Platform. But in order to explain the concept of variables, I must start with explaining what are environments and solutions first. So I'll start with explaining or talking about environments. So what is an environment? This concept of environments is very specific to the Power Platform. It doesn't apply to all Office 365 applications, only the applications that come under Power Platform, which is like the Power Apps, the Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents. So they're they fall into the purview of environment. In the Power Platform, environment can be considered as a container for various Power Platform services such as uh, Power Apps, Power Automate, Power Virtual Agents. So this concept of environment is very specific to Power Platform. It doesn't apply to other Office 365 apps like SharePoint. They are not environment aware. So this is very specific to the Power Platform. And it is a way to organize apps, flows, or bots together in one logical container. And this allows you also to control access to the data and the resources that they use. If you already have an Office 365 license, a default environment is available to you already. You can create additional environments as required, depending on your organization's requirements. I'll quickly change my screen and I'll jump over to the Power Platform Admin Center and show you how the environments look. So there are two ways to get to the environment, to access the environments. One is uh, by going to admin.powerplatform.com and then clicking on environments from there. So depending on your role, you'll see all or some environments that you have provisioned. If you're a Power Platform admin, you'll see all the environments provisioned within your organization. So creating an environment is as easy as, and before I go about creating the environment, I'll just quickly go back to the Power Apps landing page. I'd like to point out that you can access the environments by clicking on the environment selector on the top right, and that by default, it's always going to show the default productivity. Environments can be accessed from the admin center. To access environments, you could either go to the Power Platform Admin Center by typing admin.powerplatform.microsoft.com, and clicking on environments from the environment selector on the left. And that basically displays one or more environments to you. So depending on what role you have, if you are a Power Platform admin, you'll see all the environments that it has. But if not, then you'll only see the environments that you have created. You can also get to this page by going to your Power Apps landing page or the Power Automate landing page and clicking on the cog and clicking on admin or getting to the admin center from there. It takes you to that same page. So on your Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents, you can change the environment by clicking on the environment selector. So if your organization has only one environment, you'll see that environment by default, and it is usually termed as the personal productivity environment. And if you click on the selector, you can switch between various other environments that you have. Now, why do you need to create a separate environment when you have a Power Platform environment already? So the one that is available by default is available to the entire staff. So anyone can go and build applications, personal productivity applications. But if you're building enterprise applications, that's not the right place to build your applications because the personal productivity environment would not go in line with application lifecycle management. What that means is if you're building an enterprise application, you would want to have a dedicated development environment, move it through to test, to user acceptance testing, to production. So you would want to have more control over how the applications are developed and how they are handed over to the operations. So that's why it's recommended that if you're building applications for enterprise, build them on a dedicated developer environment. And then once they're ready, then move them to other environments. How do you create an environment? I'll go and create one for you. You just click on new, specify the name of the environment. I won't go in much detail about environments because the talk today is more focused on environment variables as such. But it is as simple as just typing a name of the environment, select from the drop down, you can select the type of environment you are creating. A sandbox environment is more like a development environment, production environment, well, as it explains itself. The trial environment gets created and it's just available for a few days, I think 30 days or so. Now, the next part is important. So if you were to use solutions or environment variables, you have to make sure that you have this option turned on because solutions and environments, they use Dataverse. So Dataverse is being used to store the solution configuration and also the environment variables. So by selecting that, just go through the wizard, click on next, and you'll have a new environment created. It takes about a minute or two for the environment to get created. So you might have to just wait for a while before it starts appearing in your list of environments here. So I'll quickly jump over to the slides again. So I explained you what environments are. The next thing is solutions. So what are solutions? Solution is, again, like a logical collection of apps and flows and bots. The only difference between a solution and an environment would be that solution is a subset of an environment. So in one environment, you could have multiple solutions, and each solution would have its own use case. So environment is more like a place where solutions reside. And solutions are generally used to package, deploy components from one environment to another, as well as to share them across one or more organizations. If you were to move an application that you built in one developer tenant over to another, that's where solutions come handy. Now, the next question is, do you need to use solutions or is it not possible to build applications without solutions? Well, the simple answer to that is it is possible to work without them. However, not using solutions can make it more difficult for you to manage or deploy your resources, especially in a large organization or in a complex project. You would find it really hard to maintain consistency across development and production apps. So in order to explain it, I'll quickly jump over to a demonstration. What I have here is a expense application which I have built. It doesn't do much. All it does is there is a list called budget, and there's some list items. And what my app does is it looks at that list and displays them in a gallery. That's all it's doing. Now, one thing to note here is that it has a data source, which means that this app has a tight integration or a dependency on the data source that I have included here, right? If I were to connect this same application to a to a similar list in another environment, I have to make changes in the app itself. As in, I have to open the app, get rid of this data source, add the new data source in, publish the app, maybe not publish the app, save it as a different app because I don't want to overwrite the development one. Or I want to save a copy of this one, whereas I also want to create another app which has the same functionality, except it's connecting to a different list. But from what I'm saying, you can understand that the problem here is that you are now having two instances of the app, one connecting to dev, one connecting to prod. But at the same time, you cannot make sure that someone goes and updates the production app. There's no way to know if the same changes have been applied to the development one or not, because these are two separate apps altogether, and Power Apps has no idea that they are connected in any way. So these are two separate apps altogether. So that's the problem with not using solutions. Now, how can a solution or environment variables help in that regard? So wouldn't it be good that instead of specifying the list itself, if I would just say that I point it to an environment variable which tells it which list to connect. So that way, I'm not creating a direct connection of the app to a specific data source. Rather, I'm saying that the environment variable is going to tell you what data source to connect. And that way I'm decoupling the two, right? It'll start making more sense when I actually show you how to use environment variables. But I think with this slide, I was trying to explain, is it possible to build apps without solutions? The answer is yes, you can. But should you? I've highlighted what issues you can face if you're not using solutions. So now the same application, I'll just change it slightly. So once we have created an environment, you can go click on solutions, and then you can create a new solution from here. So I can say I'll create a new solution. I'll call it a budget solution. And then you're required to create a publisher. So what a publisher does is like if there are several applications or solutions built within an environment, there are chances that uh, there could be same uh, flow names that people have used or same app names people have used. How would you know from a environment perspective that which app is associated to which solution? So the concept of publisher is that it helps you to uh, identify the different artifacts that get created. So when you if you create a new publisher, you can give it a name. Let's say if I say budget, and I give it the same name again, and it will ask you to specify a prefix. So if I just say BDG, so what that does is that every object that it creates, whether it be flow, whether it be an app, or if it is, say, a Dataverse custom table that you have created, they all get appended with BDG. So that makes it easier for you to identify if this object is associated to this application I was building. So then you just say save. So now this new publisher has been created. I'll just select that as a publisher. And then one thing I'll come back to later is the concept of managed and unmanaged solutions. But for now, this is all that you need to provide. And once you click on create, it creates a solution for you. So the solution has been created. As you can see, there's uh, various artifacts you can associate with this solution. It can be apps, chatbots, flows, or Dataverse tables. If you're working on a brand new project, you'll create the solution first and then add apps or flows from within the solution selector. So you'll go and create a new app from the by selecting new from the context menu, or the same goes for Power Automate or Power Virtual Agents, whatever it may be. But in my case, where I already have an app which is not using solutions, I can still include it as a part of a solution. So this is how you solutionize the apps that are not currently solution aware. For that, what I'll do is I'll start by first creating two environment variables. And now I'll start diving into the concept of environment variables. So I'll just create two environment variables to start with. I'll call this site. Or to be more specific, I'll call this budget site. And as you can see, it appends that friendly prefix. So that from in Dataverse, I can clearly see that this site belongs to this solution, the budget solution that I had been creating. So even if others name their sites as budget site, I should still be able to tell which is the variable that I need to reference to. So I'll click on data source and choose SharePoint as my connector. And when it comes to selecting the parameter type, I'll just say site. You would have also noticed that there are several type of environment variables you can create. So data source is one of them, but you can think of scenarios where, let's say you're sending a notification to a group of people, and in your development environment, you would want those notifications to go to your email address, whereas when you deploy it to production, you want to send it to a production mail address. So that's when you create environment variable of type text, and then that environment variable will have your email address in the development environment. But when you move to production, it will refer to a different set of people. So for site, I just need to use data source as the data types. And if I click on new site value, it will show me all the sites I have access to. I'll just point it to the site I need to connect to, and I'll just say save. Now I have a variable for site, and I also need to create a variable for the list, because list is also, I'll name it budget list. List is also of type data source, but specify the name. Sometimes it creates the name automatically. In this case, it didn't, so I'll just add it there. And just to be picky, I'll get rid of the space. It is of type data source, and the data source is SharePoint, but this time the parameter is a list. And I have to select a site, and I'll select the budget site because that's the one that is pointing to the site I want to connect to. And when I click on it, it will show me all the lists available in that site, and I'll point it to the budget list. So that's all done with environment variables. I have created two environment variables. Both have the prefix BDG, one pointing to the site and one pointing to the list. So now what I'll do is since I already have the app created, the only thing I need to do is to make it solution aware. So Canvas app, and then since my existing app doesn't use solutions, I will not see it in the list of apps that use Dataverse. It will be in this other tab, which is outside Dataverse. And what I'll do is I'll pick this app and add it to my solution. The moment I do that, you'll see that it will again add that friendly prefix to it to indicate that this app is now part of the solution that I have built. Now, I have only added the app to the solution, but the app itself is not using environment variables at this point of time. So we'll go and fix that. We'll open the app from within the solution this time. After opening the app, we'll get rid of the data source that was connecting directly to this list within a site. And you'll see some errors popping up, but that's because it can't find the data source. So we'll add new data source, just how we would add a normal list, choose a connection, and but instead of selecting the site from the recent sites tab, this time we'll switch over to advanced. And here you see the environment variable that we had created. So once you select the environment variable, again, you see all the lists that are available, but I am not going to pick from here. I'll switch over to advanced and pick the environment variable that I had created. You'll see that I'm getting the same data back, but except this time I'm referencing an environment variable, but not directly a list sitting in a SharePoint site. So now my solution or my app is aware of environment variable aware. So that's all done. I'll just publish this app and go back to the solution explorer. And while I'm here, I'll also create a flow just to demonstrate how you use variables in a flow. So I'll go and create a new flow from the new section this time. And I'll keep it real simple. I'll just use maybe an item created event. And instead of selecting, just like Power Apps, instead of selecting the site from the list here, I'll click on add a custom item and switch over to the dynamic value and pick the environment variable that has the site name. In case you find this user interface different, that is because I'm using using Power Automate with experimental features on. So I kind of like this new user interface, so you could give that a try. And just how I selected a site, I'll also go and reference the list from within the environment variable. And I'll just add basic SharePoint action, maybe, what I'll do is I'll keep it real simple. I'll just add a compose action here and just type that you just created a new item with title that's the title of the new item that gets created. So I'll just click on save. I should give it a better name. And I'll call it expense flow. Okay, so that's done as well. I go back to my solutions selector here, and I see that a new flow is available. While I'm talking about flow, I would also want to talk about the concept of connection reference. So when you create flows, and if your solution has several flows, let's say 20 different flows, you wouldn't want to create a connection in each and every flow. In that case, you have to, when you move them into a production environment, you have to go and update each of the each of the connections if it is not meant to use that same connection that you were using in the dev, then you have to go in each of the flows and update them. But with connection reference, what happens is you can create a connection once and then you can reuse it multiple times. So if I go here and I say, this is my SharePoint connection, and I just select the connector from here, I'll say SharePoint. There it is. And I'll click on create. Now, when I created a connection reference, I can then go into the flow. And if there are any SharePoint actions, let's say if I have a get items action, I can tell it to not use a new connection, rather use a connection reference. So that way, it's just one connection reference that I need to change, and all my flows will start using that same connection reference. I'll get rid of this action now and go back to my solution. Okay, my solution is now ready. It has one app, one flow, and one connection reference, and two variables. So all that looks good. I'm ready to deploy this to a new environment. In order to do that, I'll do a publish all customizations from here, or you could also go and start exporting the solution and do a publish in this screen. The time that this process takes depends on how many artifacts you have. So it might vary from project to project. Okay, it's been published. So I go to next. And now is the important part here. You have two options. One is to create a managed solution, or you could create an unmanaged solutions. You'll create an unmanaged solution if you would want to be able to make changes to the artifacts within your solution. So, for example, if you have two developer tenants and you want to migrate your solution from one development tenant to another, or one Office 365 tenant to another, you could use the unmanaged solution. But if you're deploying this to a production or a UAT environment, it is highly recommended that you export it as a managed solution. We'll go ahead and export the solution now and just click on publish to publish all the customizations. This screen can the time it takes for the customizations to publish depends on app to app or solution to solution. In this case, it's a simple solution, so it didn't take longer. I'll click on next. This is quite a significant concept to understand. There are two ways you can export a solution, as a managed solution or as an unmanaged solution. The unmanaged solution means that these artifacts can still be updated. Like if you have a flow, you can still go and update that flow after it has been imported to the new environment. So it might be a valid scenario if you have two developer tenants, or you trying to move your code from one Office 365 tenant to another one, and you want to make some changes to it. But if you're moving this to a UAT or a production or a controlled environment, you should use the managed option. So I'll just use the managed option here and click on export. And we'll just wait a couple of minutes before I see a download option that appears there. I'll quickly move over to the chat section and see if there are any questions for me. Okay, the question is, can we share Canvas apps with external users? The answer is yes, you can, but these external users should first have to be invited as guest users in your Azure Active Directory. So if you open up Azure Active Directory, there's a way you can send guest invitation to external people. And once they accept the invitation, then they become, they just appear as a normal user in your Active Directory tenant. So when you're sharing the app, their name will show up. And that's how you share that information with them. I won't go into the details of Dataverse connections and all, because that's not relevant to this topic, but there is more to what I just said. It's not just sharing the app, it's also sharing the underlying data that the app consumes. So now for this demo, I'll just click on download and it downloads the solution for me. What I'll do is I'll move to my controlled environment now. And I'll attempt to import that solution here. I'll do next. And now it says that you said that you are going to use a connection reference. You have a connection to SharePoint. Are you still going to use the same account that you had been using, or do you want to change that connection now because it's a new environment? You can go ahead and create a new connection from here, or in this case, I'll just let it be the same, and I'll click on import. So when I click on import, it started importing the solution in this new environment. And once it imports, I'll go and show a couple of things to you. And there's another question. Can you send approval request to people, to external people on Power Automate? The answer is the same. Yes, just like I said that you can share apps with external users, you can also send approvals to these people, because once they're part of your Active Directory, then Active Directory would treat them as just another user within your tenant, so they can approve or reject approvals as well. Okay, so now if I click on default, if I click on the budget solution and I attempt to, let's say, update the app, I'll update this app. You'll see that it is disabled. It is disabled because it has been imported as a managed solution. So the same is going to be true for the flow that I have just imported. So that is a way of preventing people from inadvertently making changes in the production tenant and sort of it is a sort of a safeguard mechanism. Now, what about the environment variables? I needed to update the environment variables, but I can't update the environment variables as well. So there's a trick that you follow here, which is that you go to the default solution, and I'll explain you why we do this, and we'll look for the environment variables here. And I see that these are the two environment variables I had created, and I'll open the environment variable. And now I'll say that don't look at that site. Instead, okay, I don't have another list. So if this is a list in my dev instance, I have to have a similar setup in my production. Otherwise, how I'm going to demonstrate that? So let me switch over to another site. And maybe I'll use that site. And I'll provision a list here. I'll say from an existing list. The list is in that site, and the name of the list is budget. Okay, so it says a list already exists. So probably I have already created that budget list here. But this budget list has a different number of records. So that budget list had 4 records or 3 records. This one has 2 records. So let's see if that works. So we'll click on this and we'll go to the other site, which is that one. And I'll say save. And if I click on list, now it's going to complain that I was using a list with that GUID, but I can't find it anymore. That's because we have changed the site. So if we click on the selector again, we see the budget list from that's in the budget site. You'll see the selector also is showing all the list and libraries from that new site that we have now connected to. So I'll pick budget and I'll click on save. And I'll keep this window open because I wanted to show you something. But at the same time, I'll go to Power Apps and try to launch that new app that we have just deployed. So that's my expense reporting app. If I click on it, maybe not click on it, click on play. You'll see that the app now displays the information from the new site. It doesn't display 3 records. Instead, it displays the records from that new site. So our concept did work, right? So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create another item here. Let's say call demo title 3 and click on save. The reason I created this record is, remember, we created a flow which uh, is triggered when a new item is created in this list. So we'll go and check if that flow got executed. But before that, I would want to show you that if I go and click on advanced, and there's this concept of solution layers. So how it works is when you import a solution from one environment to another as a managed solution, it creates a managed layer. And managed layer is the layer that you cannot update, right? So if when you make changes to the default environment or default solution, what it does, it adds an unmanaged layer on top of your managed layer. So you see that there's that unmanaged layer that has just been added on top of this layer that I have got. Now, when you make changes to the default, to the artifacts in the default solution, just remember that you're creating an unmanaged layer on top of it. It is okay when you do it for environment variables, but you should never do that for any flows or apps. Otherwise, what is going to happen is the next time when you republish your solution is not going to, the only layer that gets updated will be the managed layer. The unmanaged layer is still going to be the one that has your customizations in. So what that means is any changes that you make in your development environment will not be reflected in your production environment, because there is this unmanaged layer that's sitting on top, which is stopping you from accessing the new changes that you've just made. So that's the concept of managed and unmanaged layers. So while we were waiting for that flow to run, let's go and see if the flow did run. Okay, that's my flow. It got modified 3 minutes ago. And it just ran, and we'll just quickly open that up. And you see that it ran successfully, and it is looking at the new list. So what I have just demonstrated is how easy it is to use environment variables in your solutions to make the apps and flows uh, uh, solution aware. So now I'll quickly move back to that PowerPoint slide that I was presenting from. Just to recap what we just saw is that all the flows, apps, or bots that we build using solutions use the same environment variables. And when you create a solution package, it packages all this up together and moves it into a new environment. You just change the environment variables, and your apps and flows and bots, they just work seamlessly. I'll just conclude with the key takeaways from today's presentation, which is that always try to use solutions. It's a good practice. There used to be a feature, I think it's still there, where you can import and export flows separately, like flows and apps. But the recommended way going forward is solutions. So upskill yourself on solutions and try to use solutions wherever possible. When you are deploying code to a managed environment, it is okay to use unmanaged solution. In fact, you should use unmanaged solutions. That's how you can update those artifacts. But when you're moving to a production or a UAT environment, always export the solution as a managed solution. A solution becomes more useful when you use environment variables, so leverage environment variables as much as you can. So that ends my presentation. So I'm happy to take any questions if you have. Okay, I see there's a question. If I use solutions, am I required to have premium licensing? Yeah, that's a very good question. The answer is no. So you don't need premium licensing for solutions. You need license only if you use. I think the reason you asked that question is because solutions get stored in Dataverse. That's what I told you, gives you the impression that probably you would need premium licensing, but that's not the case. Uh, you need a premium license for Dataverse only if you're using the Dataverse connector in Power App. We're not using any connectors, so the app or the flow that I just demonstrated or the solution that I just demonstrated, none of that will require premium licensing. I had booked like 45 minutes for this presentation. I know I am slightly over, but I thank you for your time. And if there are no more questions, I'll end this call here, but you can always leave your questions on my blog, and I'll be happy to answer you. And I thank you again for attending this session. Thank you so much. Bye.